And Shigeko, I'm going to start with the questions that you brought up last time. If I can find where to do it here. So the question last time that Shigeko left us with, was there anything around China and Southeast Asia like NATO? And I found this article that said that the Quad is like an Asian NATO. And you remember what the Quad was, the latest ring that we've put around China, which always upsets them. But the ring includes India, Australia, Japan, and by extension, us, and all the relations that we have with the 14 countries that connect around China. Okay, so now here's the Kerch Bridge bombing, the thing that upset Putin so much yesterday or the day before. And we're having problems here in the studio. What? Well, just unplug it and replug it back.
It fell off, so I plugged it back in.
John, can I take this back?
Pull it out and get your Zoom plugged in. Michael, don't plug it in until you have your Zoom up. Yes, question.
Well, just sort of noticed something the other day on relating to China and the Quad. China is the world's leading shipbuilder by an epic margin. It has a manufacturing capacity 230 times bigger than the total space available at US shipyards, enough to build more than 23 million tons of vessels, compared with less than 100,000 tons in the US. The Dalian shipyard alone has more capacity than all 7 US shipyards put together.
Yeah, that's interesting. You say that, Bob. As I was preparing, and when we get to Cabrillo, sails by the Golden Gate, it gave me an incentive just to look at San Francisco Bay and where it fits into world shipping. And so I looked up the top 20, and geez, they're all Chinese. It was just incredible, just reinforcing what you just said about the Chinese shipbuilding. Where is South Korea these days? They used to be on the map for shipbuilding.
I'll look it up. Generally speaking, according to a friend of mine, you need a GDP somewhere between $5,000 and $20,000 a year per capita to sustain a big shipbuilding industry. If you get too rich, it gets too expensive to build ships.
Yeah,
something like that.
Too rich.
Well, I'm gonna be mentioning something about China in just a second, so we'll get another chance to think about China. Let me go on here then with the Kerch Bridge explosion. So this is the Kerch Bridge connecting Russia with Crimea. And here's an aerial on the damage to the bridge. And it looks a little bit like our Bay Bridge after an earthquake, but there's more massive damage because these drone boats blew it up from underneath. Ukraine just kind of chided. They're good at trolling Putin. Zelensky is a master at media, and he says actually his security service said, well, the bridge has gone to sleep again. and that any instruments of mass murder are necessarily short-lived. So they're saying the bridge is an instrument of mass murder. This is Ukraine's retort to Putin. And there it is. The damage was from the sea up below it. And so it's going to be closed down, both sides, for a while. Now there's another railroad bridge that apparently is still open, but this bridge was Putin's 2018 icing on his 2012 Crimea cake. So here's a postage stamp, a Russian postage stamp, celebrating it. And there's a little island halfway across. It's a little bit like our Bay Bridge. So it's got two segments. But Putin started planning this bridge, had it in mind even before he took over the Crimea, because the next day, after they had claimed Crimea, they started drawing up plans. You'll see on the map in just a second, Ukraine says, hey, wait a second, we're a coastal state. This is highly illegal. 2018, the General Assembly started condemning it and has repeatedly condemned it since its opening. And it restricts the size of ships that can reach Ukrainian points on the Azov coast just by the height, as you'll see in just a second. And Russia's retort is, hey, these are two Russian territories. This is infrastructure. And so, of course, United States and EU have not taken this laying down. But restricting shipping, while it was being built, in 2015, a bulk carrier had to saw off its mast to get under the bridge because it's too low. And while it was still under construction. Then later, after it opened, Ukraine decided, okay, we're going to challenge that. We've got a port in Mariupol. That's a name that's certainly become familiar to all of us. And Ukraine sent its ship from Odessa to Mariupol, as it had been doing for, well, even since Soviet times, right? So it got to the Kerch Bridge, and they were Russian forces openly engaged the ship on its way, and stopped it. Now, after the war started, this isn't the first time the Crimean Bridge had an explosion. Maybe you remember it, and this is the way Ukraine remembers it. It was just last year. They issued their own stamps celebrating the damage to the bridge, and popular media also did. So the first time it was blown up, it was the day after Putin's 70th birthday. So again, the Ukrainians trolled him big time. The head of their security office posted a video of the bridge on social media, along with that famous video some of us old timers remember of Marilyn Monroe singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President." Of course, it was to Kennedy that she was singing, but Ukraine is sophisticated enough in social media that they were able to pull that up. The other thing I just want to mention, I don't know much more about it, but more generals are beginning to speak up. In addition to Sorokin, who is the Armageddon general, who made his reputation in Syria and kind of encouraged the mutiny. This guy has spoken out saying the same kind of stuff about Shoigu and the Defense Department management of the army. And he spoke out publicly and was fired. Think Truman and MacArthur. And now 28 other generals have at least been questioned or under some suspicion. So, you know, just seeing this war grind on, I guess on the battlefield, the remaining big hope is that the morale, the difference in morale will come into play, because the difference in ammunition doesn't seem to be making a difference. You remember we've talked about Margarita, and she has been the director of Kremlin propaganda, the head of Russian TV, and apparently, at least the Kremlin's claiming that the Ukrainians had been preparing to assassinate her, like they've had success assassinating other Russian prominent figures. So keep an eye on that development. All right, turning to China, and just piggybacking a little bit with what Bob was saying. We've talked about how what China wanted. We've been talking about that for almost a year after those special reports. And then we trace their history of relationships with the West, particularly since World War II. And we've mentioned recently that there have been some reports that hold on, China may not be as strong as we think, especially the way they've handled COVID, their population dropping, rumors of some dissatisfaction with Xi. But now the hard news on their economy is coming in, and they're not exporting as much. Their consumers are not spending as much. The real estate market is way over leveraged, and since the COVID shutdowns, the economy has slowed so much that there's unemployment among young people, 20%. The other thing that caught my eye this week is the extreme weather is affecting China and creating some anxiety about food. And there have even been plans drawn up to escape the dependence on nature by growing 40% of their vegetables in greenhouses. That's aspirational, that's a goal. They have built a 26-story pig farm so the pigs can escape the heat and increase their life expectancy. But grain and cows are proving difficult to escape from dependence on nature. And plus, their farmers are growing old and weary, quote unquote. And here's a map on the prospects of global warming on the grains of Russia. So the red are areas where grain production is going to go down. Blue in the north might increase, but they've still got a big grain problem. And the problem is they rely on imports, but guess from where? From America and from Australia. Now, I suppose they could start getting grain from the Volga basin, but that's been a problem. Also, the decrease in the Chinese working force. So we've talked about their population going down, but the Chinese are working more hours than ever. So all the labor-saving robots have not had an impact yet. And their working hours are at the very top of international rankings. There's been a phrase that workers have adopted to express their complaint. It's called 996. So working from 9 in the morning to 9 at night, 6 days a week. And that doesn't sound too appetizing to anybody. And they're making the point, they've even got a Chinese word for it, that basically means, hey, the marginal hours were not very productive and we're actually stagnating. So there's that. And this is a graphic showing that you can see the number of hours work dipped down with COVID. But it's interesting that they do have a mechanism. They pay attention to social media, and now the authorities that are addressing this invisible overtime that even our neighbors complain about, which is being kind of tied to your cell phone on nights and weekends. And there's a new workers' right, the right to rest that we can all identify with. But as I said a couple of weeks ago, they're increasing their state-owned enterprises, which means more public sector workers and decreased private sector workers. And you might expect a fall in productivity, but who knows if what we would see in the West would also happen in China. It's a different culture. But anyway, shrinking labor force we've already talked about, so things could be getting worse. To change the subject, this Friday, this movie premieres on your Apple Plus. It's called Underrated, and about Steph Curry. Underrated because he was so skinny when he was in college. This is March Madness in 2008, where even somebody like LeBron James was in the stands and could see him work his magic with his three-pointer. Little did he know then that they would create some of the most memorable playoff finals. Anyway, the reviews are good, satisfying, and it starts with his time at Davidson and how he was able to, even though being underrated and so skinny, to own the world of basketball. All right. So, any comments on current events, announcements, anything else before we finally get to Cabrillo, back to Cabrillo?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, Michael.
Did you see the recent news about Russia not agreeing to go along with the grain export this coming year?
Yeah, who knows whether they're just applying leverage. What they're trying to get an alteration of the terms for them and decrease the effects of our sanctions. So who knows? I mean, this isn't the first time, and the last time Erdogan stepped in and played an outsized role in getting them back on side, but who knows? I don't know anything more about that. Anybody else want to talk about that?
All right. And the other question is that I've heard this thing that now Russia is shipping oil to India and I guess China, who then turn around and sell it back to, I don't know if it's the EU countries where Russia is supposedly sanctioned. Like they're buying the oil anyway.
Yeah, yeah. There's our
The sanctions aren't working.
our sanctions are leaky. There's other economic stuff going on. The natural resources is really hard to stop them, but what I think we've pretty well stopped Russia from getting information technology to the extent that they're taking computer chips out of refrigerators that they buy from one of the stands, Kazakhstan. So yeah, it's leaky. Who knows? I'm putting a lot of my hopes on morale and how blatantly Putin's overplayed his hand, and I'm counting on another mutiny.
Just a comment on the exports through India and China and other countries. Yeah, it's true, huge increase, but at heavily discounted prices. So the oil revenue Russia has at least been impacted.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And I guess also their ability to buy insurance, shipping insurance, which ever since the marine trade started has always been important. Think Lloyd's of London. And it's a very risky venture, and you got to have insurance. And my understanding is that they've been shut out from that, and that's limited things a little bit, but I don't know. Okay, any other comments before we dive back into North America and Spain, as they're about ready to arrive in what we call California, but they had no idea that they were entering California. Off we go. This is the stuff we did before. I'm not going to spend much time reviewing that, but I am going to go back a little bit and talk about Cabrillo and his background and who he was. I just will say that this is him going up here, the green line. A couple of years before, the Coronado had gone up looking for the 7 cities of gold up in the Pueblos and on even further. And I only mention that because his atrocities, and you see he went to Hopi villages and went and looked down the Grand Canyon. The Hopis didn't show him the best way down to the Colorado. His atrocities, particularly on the Pueblos, the message, the Native Americans had a communication system. It was slow, but the word of what Coronado had done came across through the Indian tribes of southern Arizona and reached the coast. So when they hit the coast, natives are a little bit anxious about who these guys are. So Cabrillo leaves a place called Navidad. This was a point of departure for many of the northern expeditions. You go up the coast of along Baja, and they'd only gotten about halfway up Baja. I won't review the previous explorers except for one, which is relevant. This is the guy Alarcon, and he was sent up the Gulf. His main goal was to resupply Coronado, but he never connected with Coronado. He had all these supplies sitting at the north end of the Gulf, so he decided to go up the Colorado. And if he got off on the west side, he was the first Spaniard to touch down on what we call California, but there was no concept about what California was back then. You remember it was Queen Calafia, and one of the earliest expeditions named this the island of Calafia, and then somebody else said, no, Calafia lives on this island over here, which wasn't an island at all. And Bob Oxenberg has shown us how persistent this thought was, that Baja was an island, how long that persisted. But it was obvious that Alarcon had found that there was no break, and that Baja was truly a peninsula. But that was lost, and maps started appearing 100 years after Cabrillo, showing Baja as an island. Go figure. I'm going to ask the question: do we consider Cabrillo a discoverer, an explorer, or a conquistador, or he had one avatar where he's just a brutal slave owner, period? And how are we going to judge him? And is his previous behavior different than his behavior in California, which is going to be his last? Spoiler alert. So we're going to see that he reached Drake's Bay decades before Drake did. So in some places, he lives on as somebody worth celebrating. Even high schools have as their motto the conquistadores, in Lompoc and also Long Beach. And we'll see that Cabrillo reached Long Beach. It wasn't Long Beach called Long Beach, but he was there. But you can't understand Cabrillo without understanding his connection to Cortez. And we just got to briefly remember Cortez's charisma and daring. He burned his boats. His men were threatening mutiny and wanted to go back to Havana. Actually, not Havana. It was the Santiago, the far end of the eastern part of Cuba, where Castro was from, in fact. But there were also offices in Havana. But he had escaped from there. He was told, no, we're canceling your mission. But he'd already outfitted his ships, and he went anyway, and was an outlaw when he invaded Mexico. They sent a party of deputies to arrest him and stop him and get him to turn back. And one of the deputies that was meant to arrest Cortez was Cabrillo. And when Cortez burned everybody's boats, Cortez managed to exert his will on everybody, and they all joined up with him for the assault on Tenochtitlan. And Cabrillo was given the specific assignment to prepare attack boats. Cabrillo himself had been born in the home of high sea naval exploration, Portugal, and he was an orphan, and he was adopted by a Spaniard, and that's how he eventually, at a very tender age, I think he was still an adolescent, got to Cuba with the Spanish. So he had a lot of experience with boats, and he prepared the vessels. He needed caulk, and so he used a mixture of pine resin and human fat from the bodies of dead Aztecs. These guys were quite innovative. And so his ships played such an important role in the successful battle against Montezuma that after the war, he was granted a high honor, a horse. A horse was hard to come by, and he was offered an encomienda, which is a feudal title. Just you can be a feudal lord if you stay in Mexico, but he still had some adventure left in him, and he joined up with another senior. It was a senior officer to him, Alvarado, and he went with him all the way to Guatemala. And they sought their fortunes in Guatemala. He got an estate there. He forgot his humble roots. He became a feudal lord in Guatemala, organized gangs to round up workers, kidnapping women and girls. He was. When look at genocide today, and the only word for it back then would have been genocide. He put these laborers to work mining gold, and he became, because of his further adventure in Guatemala, one of the richest of the conquistador. For those of us who've been to Oaxaca, he figures in the subjugation of the natives, the Mixtecs in Oaxaca. What is the motivation then? Here he is, a rich man. The Spanish king is still motivated by mercantile interests. Either one of two things: find mineral wealth, so you can buy stuff, which the Spanish did in Peru, as we'll see, or find a civilization that buys stuff that makes stuff that we want to buy. And thanks to Magellan, who reached the Philippines in 1520, Spain knew about China and that they made pretty good stuff. Manila's going to be the port that's established to exchange that. So this is the famous Silver Mountain cartoon of the Silver Mountain in Peru, Potosi, and this is early days of Manila. Manila existed before the Spanish discovered it. It was a halfway point between China and Southeast Asia. But when Spain came in and had a lot of silver to spend, Manila grew by leaps and bounds. So it was Manila. I ran across this article just kind of noodling around from the Atlantic. Just an article, hey, remember when China ruled the world and mercantilism. And this is something Ramsey brings up repeatedly. He has a great graph showing that the gross national product of China was great right up until 1850. Cabrillo's primary mission is no longer to find a great source of mineral wealth. They've already got that. But look, if you run into the 7 cities of gold, by all means. But we've already found a group of people that make stuff that we want to buy. Look, why don't you go up if you can find more civilizations that are making good stuff? Great, but your primary mission is to find that Northwest Passage, because we want to get the stuff from China back to Spain quicker, right? That was the motivation. Find that Northwest Passage. And if you can't find the Northwest Passage, at least find some ports where we can resupply the boats that are coming, bringing stuff back from Manila. And you'll remember there's a clockwise current. I'll show you a map in just a second. But the problem was with the ships they had in the 1540s is they weren't big enough to keep a decent supply of food and bring back the luxuries they wanted. So they scrimped on citrus, and so the scurvy was the affliction of these Spanish mariners. And so look, find a place where we can resupply, get some fresh vegetables. So that's what Cabrillo had first and foremost in his mind. And this was a crazy map, a depiction of what they thought they would find the Northwest Passage. And of course, California is still an island here, even though Alvarado had proven that it wasn't. And that was number one. And it was fueled by this Greek theory, just following the logic of the ancient Greeks, that the world had to be symmetrical. And because Magellan had found a way through in the south, there must be a way through in the north. But that was not to be. This is the clockwise direction of trade, following the currents. And Cabrillo at least could find a place in North America where the ships could go and get fresh food to treat their scurvy. He failed in that as well, as we're about to see. So Spain is stuck with getting Chinese stuff back to Acapulco, taking it down to Panama, across the isthmus by land, reloading it, going to Cuba maybe, and then back to Seville. It would have been so much simpler to go from China directly back to Spain, but that was not to be. You'll remember they couldn't go that way because the Pope had said, no, Portugal controls this half of the world. Spain, this is your half of the world. And so this shows the currents, and it took a while for the Spanish to realize that they could follow these currents. It wasn't going to be for another 25 years until they discovered that, hey, sail north to Japan and then follow the current. But even then, they knew they needed to resupply somewhere in here, and Cabrillo was to find that. So these are the long shots, looking for more civilized people like the Chinese or rich people. And if you run into Queen Calafia, give her our regards, but also just personal greed. That Cabrillo certainly had that as a surplus. There was still the thought that, the Colorado might empty out another branch of it. Maybe just one branch emptied into the Gulf of Cortez. But maybe there was another branch which cut across the North American continent and emptied into the ocean. There wasn't. And then the other thought was, look, if there is a way to get by land just by going north and cutting over to Asia on a land bridge, well, there had been 20,000 years ago, but they were a little bit late in that aspiration. So here's the problem. Cabrillo and Alvarado decide, hey, we'll do this together. We'll collaborate, and we'll go and try to fulfill some of these missions that have been set out for us. But Alvarado was killed by Native Americans when his horse fell on him. He, as a suppressor of in Guatemala, the Mayans developed a codex to celebrate his death. This is the Mayan codex of celebrating their oppressor's death. All right, so this is that map again. In a little bit more detail, there's a couple of places I want to point out here. Ensenada. We know Ensenada is a quick getaway place from San Diego. But it was very significant when Cortez got there from Navidad, because nobody had been to Ensenada. Once he reached this far north, every place where he touched down, he was setting a record for the furthest travel north. And we'll see he got up to Point Reyes. His party, after he died, made it all the way to the Oregon border. But he missed San Francisco. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that later, because I think it's important, and it helps us review what we learned when we did the geology of California. So in Ensenada, this was Cabrillo's first opportunity for the possession ceremony, where you get off on a new land, you take out your sword, you slash the sand, you slash a nearby tree, you move some stones around, all to prove your domination of the new land you've discovered. And then finally, you baptize this land by taking some water in a jar from the sea and throwing it onto the beach. He just knew he was pretty far north, more north than anybody had. But the name California was unknown to him, just Calafia. So he gets to what we today call San Diego, and whose territory does he meet? The Kumeyaay, and they have been there since time immemorial, namely at least 15,000 years, doing their simple thing. They don't have a culture to speak of, what we would call a culture. They don't have any material sources of wealth. But further up the coast, he's going to encounter the Chumash. And this is going to be his reward for the most sophisticated people he'll meet. There are Miwoks all up and down here, but they don't have anything like the Chumash has. We'll see later on. Drake is going to encounter the Miwoks and interact with them far more than the Spanish do. Yes, Jim.
I was just wondering your source for 15,000 years ago.
Oh, it's just a stab, a rough approximation. Can you give a more precise number?
No, I don't think we know exactly. It's hard to do archaeology on the coast, and so although there's been some in the Channel Islands that would suggest maybe even earlier.
Yeah.
I just got back. I was with the archaeologist in Oregon last week, having a little fun up there. So thought I'd dive in here and suggest that we don't really know when the Chumash were there.
Did you find anything you can tell us about?
Well, we always find stuff. We're only in the cave we're currently working on. We're only at the 9,000. Well, today they're probably at 10,000 level BP before present. And they found some projectile points and stuff, but not a lot yet. We hope to find more as they go deeper.
Okay, well, keep us posted, Jim. It's good to have somebody that's got 1 foot in that far in the past. Okay, so
I thought you were going to say 1 foot in the grave. That's a more common. You were searching for it out there.
we all can laugh at your wisecrack. Very, very good. So Cabrillo proceeds north and encounters this point. And who knows if he investigated it? And I don't even know if this Mission Bay was as developed now as it was. But he didn't deem this harbor to be anything super special. I think one of the factors was that it was so far south that its usefulness as a resupply place wasn't so important. Remember, these ships are coming down the California current. And once you get in this current, you can be in Acapulco or Navidad, lickety split. What they needed was something much further north. But this was his first encounter with what we today call California. He had no concept of that. I guess I was trying to remember when I did this slide, I had a source that said they'd been living there on the coast seasonally for 12,000 years. What does that mean? It means this is where they come in the wintertime, but the summer they go higher elevation. And this is a reenactment by some San Diego Historical Society of Cabrillo landing, doing the possession ceremony, starting off with his sword. And actually, it was the National Park Service that sponsored this reenactment. This is probably more realistic. What happened at Point Loma? The ship came ashore. As happens in most societies, there are little kids out on the periphery playing around, and Cabrillo's men grabbed a couple of them and finally gave them small gifts, which broke the ice. And what gifts? Baubles of Venetian glass, anything that's shiny and sparkly. So the next day, the Kumeyaay leaders paddled out to the galleon and wanted to talk and see if they could get more of those Venetian glass beads. The Spaniards knew how much Native Americans like trinkets like this. Think about the $26 that the Dutch got Manhattan for from the natives there. And so here's what I was talking about earlier. Cabrillo saw that they were fearful, and through sign languages, they told stories of bearded folks like us riding horses and killing natives. And he knew that the Kumeyaay were on their guard from the underground newspaper that went across on the trade routes between Native Americans. And again, they were recalling the depredations of Coronado. The next day was problems. The Spanish got out and they threw in their fishing nets, and like fishing holes everywhere, you should ask permission. And they were attacked by the Kumeyaay for stealing their fish. And actually, in the exchange of arrows, 3 Spaniards were wounded, but Cabrillo did not retaliate. He did not. Coronado might have, but he had been given instructions by the new viceroy, who replaced Cortez, by the way. The new viceroy had said, hey, try a little kindness. And so he did, and avoided a lot of heartache. At this point, on Point Loma is a monument that was sponsored by Portugal, because they claimed him, even though he certainly made his name within for Spain. And this was a gift at the 1939 World's Fair, which is an important event for Aiko and me, because both our mothers visited that World's Fair. They didn't meet, but they might have crossed paths. This is a glorification of his landing in San Diego by some romantic artists in Santa Barbara up in the courthouse. Here's another moment, and notice in this one there's a Jesuit. Okay, so the Jesuits in maybe not the next chapter, but the chapter after, when we talk about them, they have an outsized influence on Spanish exploration. And of course, they're famously gonna overplay their hand, and they're going to be deprived of their special status by a future Spanish monarch and replaced by the Franciscans. And Junipero Serra, who's going to play a huge role in later chapters as we cover it. Farrager has this memorable line where he said, the natives on the coast of California used the same strategy that many other natives who are being invaded had. Hey, what you're looking for, you'll find over the next horizon, so please leave. And that's what Cabrillo did. The other book, I'll just remind you that I'm going to draw on a lot, is a very entertaining book, I think, James Rawls, where he just gives 200 essays on different periods in California history and sequence. This is a history of California, a podcast, which I think is very good on these early years. The later years of California history, I don't think have been developed as much. So he was so unimpressed that he did not follow a tradition of giving a name to a piece of land on his boat. the name that he gave wasn't San Salvador, which was the name of his boat. He called it San Miguel, but Vizcano would change it to San Diego 60 years later. So next week, we'll reach 26 miles across the sea to Santa Catalina waiting for us. So questions, comments? Aiko.
Just to put things, in a time thing, how many years before did the Pope make that division between Spain side and Portugal side? And at the time, was there any preference to be on which side of the line by either of those? Because like the Spanish really made use of their side, but did the Portuguese?
Well, Brazil. So the line came down, and Portugal got Brazil. They got India. They got India. They got you just think of Goa. They got a lot. They got a lot. I think they got a big chunk of Indonesia. I'll have to go back and look at that map.
What year was that Pope made the line?
I think it was around the turn of the century, 1500. I have to look that up too. Okay, other comments?
So we're not answering the question yet whether he was a conquistador or whether he was an explorer, or we're waiting, right?
We need more data.
Okay.
Could it,
Homer? I can't hear you.
are they mutually exclusive categories?
I suppose not. I
Okay.
suppose if you look at the richness of historical figures, I suppose not.
Well, a personal note, I'm looking forward to you talking about Santa Catalina. There's a Boucher Road there named for my great-great-grandfather who mined silver on Catalina Island.
And was called.
It was called the Mad Frenchman of Cherry Creek.
Okay. Hey, Homer, do you know that they're of Heather Boucher?
Yes, we're not related so far as I can tell, but she even spells it the same odd way.
She
I'd like to claim a relationship, but I can't.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, she is probably Biden's most radical economic advisor. Yeah,
That's correct.
Jim. I thought Jim had his hand raised. Maybe not. Any other comments?
I just needed to unmute. The Treaty of Tordesillas was signed in 1494, to answer your question.
Oh, so right after Columbus got back. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for the real-time research. That's what we do here, folks. All right, anything else?
No.
Okay, good. I'll see y'all next week on Santa Catalina.
Thank you.
Thank you.